here we are in the Jardin du Luxembourg in the 6th arrondissement of Paris. So we're right in the centre of the city and yet surrounded by tranquility and by nature. But as you can see, it's a very French variety of nature, one which is very strictly controlled by human hand. Looking over there at the trees, they're all in a row, all the same height, a certain distance from each other, and even the flowers we have here are all the same kind of tone of colour, aren't they? It's very typically French.
Very much so, and it's a very precise kind of control. The point is, it's an approach to nature that's very different from that perhaps romanticised view that we're used to in Britain, where we think of nature as something that's much freer.
Yes, and it's reflected in music by composers of our period. People always link Debussy and Ravel with the term Impressionism.
And of course Debussy himself considered it a term of abuse at the time. He hated being called an impressionist.
What those idiots call Impressionism.
Yes. So it's not that he didn't admire Impressionist painting, there's nothing to do with it. It was the attack of being considered vague and imprecise. If you wanted to upset Debussy, or many French composers or creative thinkers accuse them of imprecision.
Well, if we think about La Mer, for example, just how precisely Debussy notates everything, as we could see in the manuscript, and how we often have several distinct rhythmic layers operating simultaneously, so you can hear every single instrument. It's not that the music doesn't sound improvised or spontaneous, it's the fact that there is a clear formal controlling mechanism. And of course other composers have been inspired by nature as well. Immediately I think of Ravel's Jardin, based on a fountain, so it's kind of nature, isn't it? But again, you know, you switch it on and you switch it off, don't you?
Yes, yes.
And the other thing we could think about, of course, is Messiaen and his bird pieces. There's a composer who we immediately associate with birds.
Well, and there's a very controlled nature. I mean, if you think of the oiseaux exotiques of the 1950s, obviously he's bringing all sorts of different birds together that couldn't possibly be in the same actual environment. But in pieces where he is giving a portrait of a bird in its natural habitat, in Catalogue d'Oiseaux, for example, it's still the selection and control. As with so many artists, it's what you leave out that's so telling and that highlights and explains what is there.
Yes, there's that piece based on the buzzard, for instance, La Buse Variable, which starts with the buzzard flying in, it gets into a fight with another bird later on, and then it ends with it flying away. So within the duration of the piece, it's a very, very structured day in the life of a buzzard, as it were.
Yes. But let's not forget, Messiaen, of course, was not the first person to use birdsong in his music by a long stalk, actually. And we have some very precise nightingale music in Ravel, in L'Enfant et les Sortilèges, so, which is almost precisely notated as all sorts of nightingales that you find in Messiaen.
Debussy once wrote that it was more valuable to watch the sunrise than to listen to the Pastoral Symphony for a composer. Just showed how much he loved nature and how he wanted to distance himself from a certain type of Beethoven-esque imitation of nature. But we see in La Mer, for instance, there's a sunrise movement, and in Ravel as well, there are some gorgeous sunrises.
Yes, in Daphnis and Chloe, at the beginning of that second section. But both the sunrises are some of the most exquisite and magical moments, well, I would say, in all of music.
Yes, almost tactile, isn't it?
Yes.
Really gorgeous stuff. I think though with Debussy, it's almost as if people were absent from these landscapes and seascapes, as if he really wants to see nature in itself, on its own, without any supposed human mediation.
Yes, and I think that's an interesting comparison with Ravel, because in the sunrise in Daphnis and Chloe, of course you have got people, albeit Daphnis is asleep and is about to be woken to show that Chloe has been rescued. So there are humans. And of course there are humans present in Messiaen's magical Jardin du Sommeil d'Amour.
Now that's a different sort of garden altogether, isn't it?
Yes, yes, a rather kind of naughty garden perhaps.
Yes, F sharp major, the key of love, his favourite.
Absolutely, exquisitely expressive, very, very important love key. Because then there's the nature in that case is observing the sleeping lovers in that magical movement.
Yes, as if the lovers have merged into one and merged with nature as well, the sort of ultimate union.
Yes, and they're being serenaded by the twittering of birdsong.
And by the En Martineau.